Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Daily Friend Wrap. Today is the 28th of May. That means we have less than 24 hours to go until the polls open for South Africa's 2024 national and provincial elections. And there is a lot of excitement in the air, at least in my household, because these elections are possibly going to be quite fascinating and deliver a result that South Africa has not seen for quite some time. The ANC stands a relatively good chance of falling below 50% of the vote for the first time since democracy came to South Africa. So I think it's worth talking a little bit about the sort of final bit of the campaign here. While most of the public polling we've seen, and also sort of indications of the way the parties have acted, leaking from the various political parties' internal polling, suggests that the ANC may be headed for somewhere around 45% of the vote. But that's not a done deal. It's worth remembering that polling is not an entirely precise activity. You do have to essentially make some assumptions about the electorate, about what the turnout's going to be, and various things like that. And in the very sort of final days of a poll, you might see swings in one direction or the other. So, in fact, the Social Research Foundation, who have been doing this daily tracking poll, have put out a thing talking a little bit about what they call an unlikely scenario, but still a possibility that the ANC could reach 50% of the vote or slightly over. They basically say that, and I'm summarizing this, but I do suggest you go read it for yourself if you're interested in this, that with a last-minute swing of a few percentage points towards the ANC and the right turnout model from MK, essentially if MK, which is a very new party that hasn't proven itself particularly electorally yet, is not able to mobilize voters, there's a swing of their voters towards the ANC, and the right sort of turnout model, the ANC could just manage to get over 50%. Marius, what do you make of this? And what do you make of the range of possibilities that we're going to see in this election? I mean, the way I see it, we could see anything from an ANC in the low 40s to the low 50s.
Yeah, I think all those possibilities are all quite likely. None of them are impossible. This also makes it quite exciting. This is the first election where we don't know for sure who's going to be the first post-apartheid election. We don't know for sure that the ANC is going to be getting majority and forming the next government by itself. I mean, it's obviously pretty unlikely, but it's not impossible that we could get a DA-led coalition. I mean, that would have then all the polls would have to be completely wrong, but it's something that's not completely beyond the realms of possibility. It's all quite exciting, and I do think. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the ANC gets above 50%. As you said, MK are going to have to work to get their supporters out. And our former colleague, Gareth van Onselen, he was saying that parties that are based on grievance, kind of like the MK and EFF, their supporters are actually quite soft, actually. They're not as likely to go to the polls as the people who are supporting the ANC or the DA and whatever, and that kind of thing. But I'd just like to talk about a quick tweet here from Dr. Sitimbile Mbete. She's at University of Pretoria, and she's a political scientist. So she's quite tweeting a tweet by Adrian Basson, the editor of News 24. He's talking about the SRF's tracking poll, which says the ANC at 40, the DA at 27, MK at 13. So she says, no, man, this is silly. ANC would need to lose 17.5 points to get to 40%. How? Best performing new entrant was Cope in 2009 at 7.42%. For MK to get 13%, the ANC would have to have zero support in KZN. Not going to happen. Where's the DA getting extra 6 points to get 27%? And she's making all very valid, fair points here, but it's always very dangerous to assume that the kind of how things have been going before are going to carry on happening. Things can change, and they can change very quickly. I also think ANC losing 17.5 points is quite unlikely, and I find that it's one of those things that doesn't really pass smell test for me. But we must never assume that this kind of thing is impossible. And this has happened in democracies all over the world. I was looking at it. The Conservatives in Canada in 1993 lost nearly 30 points. They lost 154 out of the 156 seats they held. So they stopped being the governing party to being only the fourth or fifth biggest party. There was an election in Lesotho in 2022 where the governing All Basotho Congress, the ABC, they went from 40 points to 7 in one election. It's happened in Israel in the 1970s where Labour went from 40% to about 25% in just one election. So we must not assume that precedent means that that this is going to carry on going. And while I do think an ANC at very high 40s or just getting over 50 is definitely not impossible and maybe even likely, we must not think that also them being at 40 is completely beyond the realms of possibility.
Yeah, I think that's about right. There are so many things that affect exactly what happens on election day. Everything from last-minute events in the campaign to the smoothness of the voting process to the sort of turnout by different party supporters, which party supporters are the most keen to turn out, all that kind of stuff. But it is, we were talking a little bit before the show about this, and it's very exciting to be able to sit on the cusp of an election and truly not really know exactly what the outcome is going to look like. For me, that kind of does say something positive about South Africa's democracy. Has its problems, but definitely the fact that we don't know who's going to be the majority party, or if the ANC will be the government necessarily tomorrow, I think is a very interesting and wonderful thing about the country. In that it's when elections get very boring and very predictable, I think it does say, even if it's a free and fair election, it does say something along the lines of your country is kind of either in a very good place or in a very stagnant place. And I think that this election may be the beginning of us breaking out of kind of a political inertia that we've been experiencing for at least the last 10 years.
And also, I think with our electoral system, everybody's vote counts. With our proportional representation system, if you live in the US, if you don't live in one of the swing states, it's actually quite pointless to go vote. If you live in California, Joe Biden's going to win that state. Or if you live in Texas, that Donald Trump's probably going to win the state. So unless you're in one of the handful of swing states, your vote actually doesn't really count for much. And it's the same in the UK, where there's lots of safe constituencies, and they're having also an election in just over a month. If you don't live in one of the constituencies, kind of swing constituencies, your vote really isn't really going to count for much. So I think that's one thing about South Africa. That's also something it's quite nice to live in a place where we know your vote's going to count for something.
So the election has actually already started. We have what are called the special votes that have been going on yesterday and today, and these are two types of votes. One is from people who are not able to vote on election day. This tends to be IEC officials or party agents or people who are maybe leaving the country just exactly on that day. And then home visits, which is something you have to sign up for beforehand. The IEC comes to your house, and this is mostly for people who are sick or very disabled or very old and can't travel to their voting station. I know there's some concern from people talking about the fact that in the special votes, the home visits, there's two envelopes which your vote is put into, and the outside envelope has your name on it. And I know some people are worried about that, but that is specifically done to make sure that only the people who have registered for home votes get their votes counted or on that day, so that no one is adding extra votes into the system. When the votes are actually counted, they first take your vote out of the outer package, which has your name on it, and they put it into a pile, which then it becomes anonymized. The only time that your vote will be known is if you're literally the only person at a voting station to get a home vote, in which case obviously it can work out who you voted for, but then it's supposed to be put into a big pile and then mixed up with all the other ballots so that you can't tell anyway. So it does seem kind of weird, but it actually generally results in no one knowing your vote. But yeah, we have had some troubles though around the country. In Mthatha and the Eastern Cape, and this somewhat surprised me because I expected this kind of thing to happen in the KZN. We saw a taxi operator strike, which forced the closure of 100 voting stations in Mthatha during the special voting period. Looks, however, like that has been resolved now, and the strike will not continue tomorrow, so the voting will continue to go ahead there. But Marius, what do you make of this? I mean, what do you make of the kind of overall level of sort of violence and chaos we've had in the lead up to this election? I think there's been some, but it hasn't been as bad as I perhaps feared there might be.
Yeah, overall it seems to have been okay. Unfortunately, there have been some reports. Apparently, two MK guys were shot dead in Katlehong, I think it was. And I'm obviously not a fan of the MK party at all, but even their supporters should be left alone and be able to campaign freely and without any threats of violence.
There was also the incident we talked about that got very little news coverage of ANC and EFF supporters shooting at each other in Limpopo, and a young girl being wounded in that shootout.
Yeah, so overall, I mean, it's terrible. Obviously, even one life being lost is far too many. So overall, we should be grateful that it has been relatively peaceful so far. I think we can call this. I mean, it's obviously the levels of violence probably much more than your established democracy in the West. But I think still for democracy such as ours, which is still pretty young, things have been pretty calm, I think, and I think we've seen some. I think the levels of political maturity in our campaigning has been pretty good overall, I think. But maybe also I'm talking from a middle class bubble. There might be more intimidation in other parts of the country. But from what I've heard and what I've seen, it seems that things have been going fairly smoothly, and people have been able to campaign freely and not being intimidated and so on. Apart from obviously isolated incidents we've spoken about.
All right, so we shall have to see what happens with tomorrow's election. It is going to be, as I said, a very exciting day that I'm looking forward to. I hope that everyone listening who is registered to vote goes out and votes, because it is an election, I think, where we shall remember it for many years afterwards. People will kind of, I think, draw lines back to this one saying, whatever happens 10 years from now, they'll say this is the point at which that process started, I suspect. Anyway, I hope that you all found the show interesting, and we will see you again on Thursday to talk about what just happened in the 2024 elections. Cheers, everyone. The Daily Friend Show and The Daily Friend are a project of the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. The IRR is a think tank which was founded in 1929 to study race relations in South Africa and works to change government policy to improve race relations through non-racialism and to ensure the prosperity of all South Africans. If you like our work and would like to support us, please go to irr.org.za and click Support the IRR. Or you can go to thedailyfriend.co.za and click the Fund Us